We wore them on staff.
I had a sash, and then when I moved to the bed, so I wore it for Victoria's Secret when I was at my grade and my little.
Well, I was the youngest of seven. The youngest we all wore the same. Well, our tonight group was so small.
We'll try to switch it to the catalog, which you.
Where's that? What's that?
It is
He was showing up short.
about 100 miles from DC.
So either way, he was going to be short.
Yeah.
This
I grew up in Illinois. In
the
Locker.
Greek planner is telling us.
That's like,
Way
that's
It's
the
telling
other
his
side.
advisors
Yeah.
that.
Pretty far south of that.
Yeah, I thought
Check. They could switch it to the old catalog, it would be quicker. Okay. What if they showed somebody just showed it to be short?
How close to Kansas?
They were able to somehow find more. It's
Pretty far. Pretty far.
coldest day in the state was minus 60 below zero. 67 below zero actual temperature.
I could kill you.
And we did not use coal furnace, which would one be great.
Oh,
Well, it was never that cold when I was there, but it's also here in 40.
get that cold.
Below is cold.
As long as I'm.
Really good at emergency houses.
They have to say something.
They also
Fire.
say you can't be tested.
I think so.
People were required to do
Well, some of them.
That's what I was going to do. Sit down.
We're also video recording everything, so we can't be in person, they can watch it online.
I wrote out some. I did this about 9. I printed it out.
If y'all wouldn't mind, please make sure you see into the microphone.
You can do it, man. You can do it.
No, I'm not trying to marginalize. So y'all may need to just pass this mic. And then, we're recording it. So we're trying to video record these sessions, so our new faculty specifically can go in and watch the videos afterwards. So that was not just.
So if you like that.
My name is Kelly Smith. I'm with the Center for Faculty Excellence. I'll be moderating today's panel. Today's session will be an informal conversation with department chairs and an associate dean about what faculty should know about annual evaluations, pre-tenure review, and the promotion and tenure review process. Joining us on our panel today is Dr. David Bridges, Chair and Professor of Engineering, Dr. Pam Brianna, Chair and Regents Professor of Psychology, Dr. Brian Shelton, Chair and Associate Professor of Music, Dr. Diana Sykes, Professor of Music and Associate Dean in the College of Liberal Arts, and Dr. Kevin Concannon, Chair and Associate Professor of English. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and let them give a brief introduction of themselves and give them an opportunity to give an overview of their experiences with department leadership and faculty evaluations and portfolios. We have some prepared questions and topics that we will go over, and then we'll also leave a couple of minutes at the end for question and answer. So, Dr. Bridges,
Thank you, and thank you for the promotion. I'm actually still just an associate professor. I've been chair of engineering since the fall of 2015, since the beginning of my 5th year, halfway through the 5th year almost. We conduct annual evaluations in the spring. I meet with each faculty member. We have an annual evaluation form that's filled out. So they basically what we fill out first are the digital measures reports, and we're going to get to that in more detail through the course of the panel. But we review the digital measures. I meet with the faculty, then I write up annual evaluation report and give it to them, and then we go over it again, and they sign it, and it goes on to the dean's office. And again, that happens in the spring. It always happens later than I would like it to. It always takes longer to get through that stuff and get the reports ready to be reviewed. But that's the process. And then, as part of that process, particularly for assistant professors, that is tied to review for annual kind of update on promotion and tenure. So the context of the annual review is also progress toward promotion and tenure. There's generally some statement about that in the annual review. So.
Can you hear me? Is it mic? Okay, hi, I'm Pam Brianna. I'm chair of the Department of Psychology and Sociology. I've been chair for 6 years, and I'm still standing. But I've been at the university since the university did their major expansion in 1994, so I've served on numerous tenure and promotion committees as a faculty member. I've done post-tenure review, and I've been on the college and the university tenure and promotion committees. That's what happens when you stay somewhere a long time. You get to do a little bit of everything at some point in time. So I've seen a lot of portfolios come across my hands that I've had to comment on in different kinds of ways. As a faculty member, when there's been a promotion or tenure dispute, and also as a department chair. And certainly, this is it's a moving target in some ways, because the standards that we came in with 25 years ago have changed since that time, and the process has changed significantly too. If you are in a multidisciplinary department, chances are the person who's reading your materials may not be in your academic discipline. And I think one of the critical issues in the tenure and promotion review file is being able to communicate what your research agenda is and how you're accomplishing it, without being so technical and discipline specific that the tendency is going to be for people who aren't familiar with your things to kind of skim through that a little bit more quickly. So there are all kinds of unique challenges, and what I would encourage you to do is, as you prepare for tenure and promotion, talk to both junior faculty talk to your department chair, but talk to senior faculty and make sure that you have a real awareness of what the policies and procedures are. When we were really small, when I first came in '94, we had 3,000 students. And we probably had as many faculty as are currently in the College of Liberal Arts right now. And so a lot of the values in the tenure and promotion process were transmitted through, casual discussions in the department, because we were tiny enough that we could always let people kind of know what was expected and what they needed. And most of us are working in larger departments now, and again, many of them are multidisciplinary, and sometimes those values aren't as easily transmitted and they don't come across on paper very well. So your colleagues are your best resource, because the bottom line is everybody really wants you to succeed. The process of hiring you was a laborious, painstaking process. You were selected because we thought you would be a good contributor to the discipline and the department and the university. So we really, really want to keep you. And I think it's important to remember that, because I think sometimes new faculty can see it as kind of an adversarial process when it isn't intended to be. So that's what I would encourage you to do, is make sure that you have plenty of dialogue with the people in your department and discipline about what the process is like, and they can help you enormously.
Hi, I'm Shelton. I am chair of the music department, and actually my experience is almost like the opposite side of what Pam has. I was named chair last year, and I'd only had tenure for, this is my second year of tenure. The 1 year I would have been on the tenure and promotion committee, we had no one go up. We had no one go up for third year review, we had no one go up for promotion and tenure. So actually my first evaluations I did last year was the first of any kind that I had done on portfolios. So what I would say to you, and I'm sort of expanding on what Pam said, take charge of your portfolio. That's your number one thing. You are telling a story. That's what I want. I have 28 faculty members I have to evaluate. I don't want to have to sift through your portfolio to find your story. If you have the opportunity by prioritizing things inside your portfolio and through your narratives to tell me what you want me to hear. And that's what I'm going to believe you. And the bottom line is, when someone writes something, they're telling me their story. If their story isn't clear and I have to go searching for it within the portfolio, it's just not, it's not something I look upon favorably. I don't want to have to try to find it. People will put lots of information inside of it, and I have to sit through and try to find the important things. And you want to take charge of it. It's just not information you're giving us. You're weaving a tale, a story of what you're doing and what's important to you. Because what Pam was talking about, when it starts to go up the line, you need to tell them what's important. You need to say, this is what's important in my discipline. So if someone from engineering looks at something from music, they understand why it's important, and they may not, because we actually had a discussion, Diana had a discussion about a particular conference that's really important to music, but it's a Texas conference. So someone might look at that and be like, oh, that's just a regional conference. Well, 12,000 people attend the conference from all over the world, and there's musicians that come from all the continents to be at this conference. So it's more important, and that's what someone will need to know. So when they read it, they go, I see why this is important. Even though it has the name Texas on it, I see why this is bigger than just Texas. And if I were to read someone from another area, that's what I would want from another discipline. I want you to tell me what's important and why it's important. Because in the end, you have to advocate for yourself. That's going to be one of the most important things in this portfolio. It's not just a list of information, it's advocacy. It's saying this is why what I'm doing matters and why it's important to the university.
Hi, everybody. Okay, can you hear me all right? I'm Diana Sipes, and I'm the Associate Dean for the School of Arts, Media, and Communication within the College of Liberal Arts. And this is my 4th year doing that, but prior to that, I spent 5 years as the chair of the Department of Music. I'm finishing up my 26th year in higher education. I've been through the tenure and promotion process at 2 different universities. I've served on the college, elected positions to the college, promotion and tenure committee that we had prior to the current process, done lots of reviews. I've helped lots of colleagues by looking at their binders. I used to share my binders, and honestly, that's one of my pieces of advice is when you're talking to junior and senior faculty members to get advice on what to put in. Ultimately, I think the best binders you can look at if you want a model would be to ask around and find out who, you know, within your department or a nearby discipline has just gone through the process and done so successfully. Everybody always knows who's had a really good binder lately. Look at that one. Because the reason I don't share my binders anymore is because they're not the same as what's expected now. And I think it would be misleading for people to look at my particular binders. So you want to look at something recent that was really good and use that as your model. Also, they keep talking about the narratives. I know we have a question coming up later to talk about the narratives that you put into your promotion and tenure portfolio. So don't leave those to the last minute. I think oftentimes we get really caught up because most of us love really pretty things that are really organized and all the tabs and the colors and all of that. And that's important too, actually, to keep it nicely organized. And it's easy to leave the writing stuff to the end, but it's really the most important thing. So make sure you spend enough time on that you don't leave it to the last minute. That's also important in your annual report that you do, your activity report. When we put our stuff into digital measures, you have to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the screen to find the actual activity report section. Oftentimes, I've had faculty tell me, well, I put all my activities in there. They're all there in digital measures. Why do I have to fill out this annual report part where I put in my goals and accomplishments? Isn't that redundant? And yes, perhaps it is, but as Brian said, that's where you get to brag on yourself. That's where you get to highlight what's important and why it's important for your department chair. And that way your chair can go straight to that section, that accomplishment section, and go, oh yes, I see, that's why that is so important. And it's more likely to show up in your annual review. And it's your chance to help yourself. So do make sure that you go all the way to the bottom of that page in digital measures where you're putting everything in and fill out those goals and accomplishments for your annual activity report.
All right, does this work? Can you hear me? I'm Kevin Concannon. I'm chair of the English department. Like David, I've been chair for about 5 years. And I think it's interesting that most of the chairs on here are associate professors. It's just kind of a new thing at this university. Previously, all the chairs had been full. In fact, in English, faculty who were chairs were named chairs right when they were going to retire. So it was like their last 3 years they got to be chair, which I'm not sure is a benefit or not. The reason I'm saying this is that for us, for David, for Brian, and myself, we are just recently tenured, right? I mean, we just went through the process. We kind of know the experience. So I think it's important to sort of think about the chair not as someone opposed or adversarial, but like as Pam was saying, as someone who's very supportive. We want you to succeed, and we'll do anything to help you succeed. So if you have questions or concerns, please come talk to the chairs. I always had the sense when I was an assistant professor that I should just keep my head down and not talk to the chair at all, because the chair never saw me. I thought that was a good thing. And that's not really the best case scenario. I would like to help you, and I'd like to meet with you, right, and make sure your portfolio and things are and answer any questions that you have. The other thing real quick is that there's two things going on. One is we have the annual review, and you need to fill digital measures out to do your annual review, which is done every spring. The narrative, at least in English, is not exceedingly important for your annual review because you're not going to write a different narrative for every year that you're going up. It's really a sense of talking about what work you've accomplished that year and reflect on that. Sort of say, maybe this class didn't go so well, but my plan for the future is to do this. And that's really more important, not to sort of mask issues, but to sort of say, hey, I realize that this text maybe wasn't the best choice. Next semester I'm going to do this. But the second part of this is the tenure binder, and that's where you want to write a narrative. You want to make clear what your research is, what your research plans were, what you've accomplished, those types of things. So there's kind of two areas, right? Your annual evaluation, which is done every year, and then those are then included in your tenure binder, which is at your end of your 5th year. And then that is what needs to be broad enough that allows people from engineering or from business to understand it as well. So the annual evaluation may be more specific in terms of your research, and the tenure binder can have some of those specifics, but needs to be contextualized in a way that a college curriculum committee, or I'm sorry, a college tenure committee can look at it, and a university tenure committee can look at it, and then ultimately the provost and regents. So, anyway, that's all I've got.
Great, thank you very much, everybody. So I know that we've already talked and mentioned a couple of items that deal with digital measures and the faculty activity report, and as many of you know, the majority of our audience today is new faculty. And so the first question that I'd like to pose to the panel, and I'll just open it up however you want to answer it, but when our new faculty members are preparing their first faculty activity report, that'll be due on January 31st, I know in the College of Liberal Arts, is that different in science and engineering?
I think it kind of set by department.
Okay. So what do our new faculty need to know about the most important information that you need in their faculty activity report in order to most properly evaluate them?
First of all, it has to be filled in completely. I get a lot of faculty activity reports, and I go through them quite carefully before I meet with people for evaluations. We're evaluating a little over 30 people now in our department. And someone will say, well, but I did this. And I'll say, well, that's not your faculty activity report. Well, I wanted to count anyway. Well, you know. And it's interesting to me sometimes that faculty who are usually painstaking in their expectations of students in terms of student accountability and precision do not feel that they should be measured by the same standard, you know, and so I think that that's something important to think about. There are a couple of other things worth mentioning. The first year I was here, when we had to do the faculty activity reports by hand, a senior colleague came by and he said, Pam, pick a drawer on your desk and put in something from everything you do. You go to an event like this, put in the flyer, everything. And he said, that way at the end of the year, it'll all be in the same place, and you'll be able to enter it more completely. And it sounded so simple to me, I was kind of like, meh, you know, but I'm telling you, 20-some years later, I'm grateful to have had that drawer, because even though we live in an electronic age, as time passes, sometimes finding your electronic documents is more complicated, etc. And it's nice to have a stash pile of tangible reminders that allows you to be able to put your things in good order. That's one thing. The other thing is most of the people who are reading your FAR have read many of them, and they could spot two common errors. One is people put too little information in. Like Deanna said, they don't fill out the goals at the end of the thing. The other thing is they put in too much. They put in, I went to graduation. Well, we know you went to graduation because everybody has to go to graduation. Or if they're addressing a problem area, they put in, you know, a whole page-long paragraph without indentation, and they repeat it over and over again, as if somehow it will make the argument weightier. And I think it's not that there's an expectation that people are going to prove anything. They just want an explanation. If they know that there's an area that is maybe hard to evaluate or that they need to give more attention to, this is just a way of doing that, and do it in the way that you would do anything else, succinctly and persuasively and without too much or too little, because again, seasoned academics are reading these things, and we can spot fluff faster than my dog catching a bone, you know? So that was kind of a bad metaphor, but I'll take it. I'll live with that.
One thing I'll say that in my department that's important is, well, I'll say there's a lot on the digital measures page if you haven't been there. but don't neglect certain areas. What I discovered going through my first time was professional development. Those that include professional development were much more impressive to me. It was more thoughtful because they actually listed the things they went to. I then went back and discovered there were a number of faculty who listed none. Like they didn't list any conferences they went to. And then once I compared them to someone who did list it, I'm like, wow, this is important. So don't neglect areas like that. Scouting creative is important, and the teaching narrative, the teaching accomplishments are important, but so is your professional development. It shows us what you're doing to better yourself as a teacher or as a researcher. So that was very important to me. And second, if you're in your first year, you won't do this, but do close the loop on things. I will look at some Starling creative, it'll say 2012 dash with no date afterward that they've been working on an article. And it's like, okay, it's been 7 years. And are they even looking at that page anymore? Or have they just forgotten that it's even there? And it made me more mindful of mine too. If I have something going back 6 years, maybe I need to just take it out of there or close it off so it's not in my report anymore. So be mindful of it. You want to make sure that you're not just putting in new information, but you're updating information you already had in there. Because yeah, it happens sometimes I'll read someone's and I'm like, I doubt they're still even doing this, but they've forgotten about it. It's not just about inputting new information, it's about updating the things that you're doing.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So if you do something one time, like it's a one-day presentation, every event you put in, everything you put into digital measures with a start date and an end date, right? If you just do it for one day, you just put it in the end date. You don't use the start date at all. And that's my follow-up is there's lots of boxes, like Brian said, there's lots of stuff on every page. I'm sure if you've been in there, you've seen it. This may vary by department, but I find that not every box applies to every single thing I do. So I think just because there's a box there for your presentation or your publication, I don't think you have to fill in every single box. Fill in the stuff that applies. And then my last bit of advice is make sure to run the report when you're done, or maybe even before you're done. If you're doing it to generate a CV, generate that CV. Go on the reports page and generate it. Generate the faculty activity report, even if you don't have to submit it. Your chair's just going to pull it. Take a look at it, because I think you'll be surprised that some of the boxes that you so diligently filled in will not actually appear on some of the reports. And so you may need to put it somewhere else, or just figure out a different way to do it. Or you may think that things are going to appear, don't, or vice versa. So do run the report, and I'd actually suggest that you run it before you're done if you're new to it, so that you don't spend a lot of time doing something that didn't quite work out the way you intended.
It might be helpful to talk to the chair to see what kind of report they actually write for your annual evaluation. I know this is going to be question number 2, but in some departments there's like a checkbox that the chair is going to fill out that says, you've accomplished blank. In other departments, like mine, you get an actual letter. And for me, it's important that what the faculty member writes in their digital measures is what I use to put in their annual evaluation. So if you don't write anything, it makes it hard for me to sort of write something in your annual evaluation. So what you put in is what I'm going to put in. So that makes it easy. If you put in something that I'm self-reflective, that I made these changes, then that's what goes in your annual evaluation, which looks good for you. So for me, I try to make it as easy for faculty as possible. In the dialogue boxes that are at the end or below each class, I tell them what you put in there, I'm going to try to summarize and put in your letter. So it's up to you what you get in your annual letter. And so, but it just depends on which department. Some departments, people are using more of a checkbox or some type of graduated scale. So you might want to check with your chair to see how they actually rank things and what you need to make sure you want to emphasize in your digital measures based on that.
You may be picking up on the fact that digital measures is not the easiest tool to use. And that's kind of our second question that's going to come up in a little bit, and this will get in our gripe session about digital measures.
Just go ahead and start that discussion now.
Okay, cool. Well, actually, it'll segue. When I do an evaluation of 3 areas, teaching, research, and service, and so I look for evidence related to teaching. It will self-populate a lot of the information, section enrollments, that kind of thing, credit hours, that kind of thing. Make sure that's accurate. and it will not self-populate evaluation scores. Now, student evaluation of teaching, these are notoriously unreliable, but at the same time, they're almost our only external measure. If we're not sitting in your classroom every day, and you're probably happy that chairs are not sitting in your classroom every day, it's hard for us to get a measure like that. So, that has to be entered by you, and it's easier if you do that than if we have to go looking for it. On the research side, what I'm looking for are publications, proposals, conference presentations. So make sure those are entered. And to a comment that came up earlier, there are certain journals that I'm familiar with in my area and in engineering in general, that if you have an article in there, that's done. There's no question. There are other journals you have to scratch your head a little bit. Well, is that really the best journal? Some of them, may take a little digging. Okay, yeah, that one's all right. What I'm seeing more of now, hearing a lot more of now, because we have certain faculty members in certain areas where we didn't have them before. There are certain conferences where I'm told it's as hard to get a paper in this conference as it is to get it published in a journal. And so I have to be cognizant of that. And apparently it is true. There's some conferences that have like a 90% rejection rate. Okay, so to get a paper in that conference is basically, because then it gets published as a conference proceedings, and that's basically a journal publication. So that's something I've had to start dealing with, but it's okay. But you have to make that argument sometimes, because my other response is, well, if it's that good a paper, then just turn around and publish it in a journal, right? But if it gets published as a conference proceedings, it's just something. If you're going to do something like that, you have to make a case. And then on service, don't gild the lily. I'm aware of the faculty members who have gifts for self-promotion. I've had one or two like that, and if they walk across the hall, it shows up in their annual review or their annual activity report. It's like, okay, I'm that nice. That's I'm glad you did that. Really not going to help your case too much. So, relevant service activities and everything, not just university or department, but if you've done professional work, I look for things like participation on technical committees for technical societies, that kind of thing. So that's substantial service work. Now, the annoyances of digital measures, and a couple of things to look out for. And this came up earlier. If you submit so you go into digital measures, say you've written a proposal and you have some co-PIs. So you go in and you list yourself, and then it will ask for co-PIs, and they'll provide a list of TAMU-CC faculty, and you choose some, and then they even have lists for people to make, or college station, whatever. When you do that, it not only shows up on your activity report, but it shows up on those other people's activity reports as well. Okay? Well, they may be filling out an activity report and putting your name on there. Both proposals will show up on your activity report. Sometimes it's obvious they're identical, but sometimes it's like someone who's doing it from memory and the wording of the titles are a little bit different, or maybe they forgot one of the co-PIs, or there was a last minute adjustment in the budget, and so the numbers are slightly different for the amount. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, I think this is the same proposal, but maybe it isn't. So you have to be careful about that. Check your own digital measures first, see if anybody else has already entered it. If they haven't, go ahead and enter it, but then make sure all the information is correct, and then let your colleagues know that it was entered, so they won't go in and enter another one. I've seen one proposal show up 3 different times on somebody's activity report because 3 different people entered it slightly differently each time. Thing with the dates. So let's say you write a proposal in 2019 that has a period of performance 2020 to 2022, so it's a 3-year proposal, right, if it's funded. It will show up. So this is just a proposal. Don't know if it's been funded yet or not, but it will show up in your annual. So what I do is when I run the report, I run it for a particular length of time. So I'm looking at basically a 3-year window. I'm interested in, I know that it's hard to get proposals funded. Typical success rates like 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10, something like that. So I'm interested in my faculty being in the game. You know, if they get proposals funded, that's great. I want them at least trying. So I give them credit when they submit proposals. But I only give them credit when they submit it the 1 year that they actually submitted it. And so you get the same proposal that shows up for 3 years because that was the period of performance. That's the way digital measures treats it. So if it wasn't funded, then I'm not sure. I have to kind of figure out when did they actually submit it? What year do I give them credit for submitting it? Okay, so that's something you have to be careful about because it will do that. So you need to basically kind of go through annually and clean things up. And then the last thing I'll say on that is what she said about, you know, it's always my intention that as soon as I do something, I'll go back to my office and record it in digital measures, and invariably I wind up doing everything at the end of the year right before I have to submit my annual report. And so don't do that. Do it while you're thinking about it, and it makes it a lot easier at the end of the year.
I'm going to go ahead and move on just a little bit. So just as faculty members are required to document their work for the annual review, we are also required to create a binder for pre-tenure and promotion and tenure for the promotion and tenure process. So what information and artifacts should be saved now and kept for these upcoming processes and reviews?
Everything. No, not really, because you're actually limited in size now in terms of the portfolio you can submit. And I think some of the same things apply to the portfolio that apply to digital measures. If you list a series of articles that you want to count towards promotion, I should be able to look them up and find them. And occasionally I cannot. And if I can't find your article, if it has been incorrectly sourced in the portfolio in some way, that's concerning to me because it makes it harder to make a case for your scholarship. I also think in terms of service, sometimes people put everything they do for service. You know, I go out and feed the cats. It's supposed to be service as it relates to you professionally. So you may do all kinds of volunteer work that is not related to your job as a professor or whatever your profession is, and that's not really the kind of service they're looking for. They're looking for, you know, I was a secretary for my professional organization. I'm on the Women and Men's Health Board initiative, which relates to something else. So be selective about what you put in there. Also, I think one of the really critical things in the research portion of the portfolio is a lot of times when people first start teaching, they're just newly out of their doctoral programs and they're still publishing significantly on their dissertation or work that they did in their doctoral program, which is great. We love that. But we also want to see where you are going. By the time you go up for tenure and promotion, you will have been here 5 years, you go up in your 6th year, correct? And we want to see that you have established a research agenda that will take you forward. Not just that you're reaping the benefit. Now you may have continuing collaborative relationships with people that you worked with in your doctoral program and are producing new research based on that. But we really want to see the trajectory because tenure is about, are you doing a good enough job? Promotion is, are you going to continue to do a good job in the future? They have a slightly different dynamic attached to them, which is why the criteria for promotion are actually higher than the criteria for tenure. If you go up for tenure and promotion to associate, it's really the promotion that's the instrumental part of that. So make sure that you can show that you have a productive timeline. One of the things that relates a little bit to what he just said is you can't really double dip. You know, you can't really count the same submission 3 times. You have to make sure if you submit and then it's published or it's revised and resubmit and you publish that you're not going to get the same credit every year for that experience. And so you can't really count things multiple times because, again, you're going to look at the trajectory, not at any single event in isolation. And I think that that's also very, very important. For teaching, nobody expects you to be an excellent teacher your first year, unless you're giving everybody A's, and then they will love you regardless. And, but in the same vein, nobody is going to be extraordinarily impressed by a graph of your numerical teacher evaluations if the actual numbers in the teacher evaluations for turnout have been poor. And that's a problem we've struggled with at the university in the last 5 or 6 years as we've gone to online teaching evaluations. If you're teaching a class of 150 people and 12 people evaluated you, that's a huge statistical problem. So I look for a couple of things in terms of teaching. I look for improvement. Everybody can have a bad class. I've been teaching a long time and I still occasionally have a class that just doesn't seem to have turned out the way I would like it to. We look for improvement. Did you have someone other than your best friend come in and observe you and write a teaching evaluation? In the old days, we used to actually have to videotape ourselves and submit it to the committee, which was a hoot, let me tell you. But having both a faculty member of equal standing, but an older, more experienced faculty member, maybe even someone outside the department, come in and look at your class and your teaching style, I think is a very powerful testimony for teaching effectiveness, because the numbers and the descriptions never tell you exactly what's happening in the classroom. So I think that's really important. Other things that people look at, and I think that this is something that's valued very differently amongst the colleges and the different disciplines, is in addition to teaching numbers, I look at grade distributions and I look at something called the DFW ratio, which is the number of students that have dropped, failed, or withdrawn from your class. Because I think if you're a good teacher, even if you're a demanding teacher, most students will stick with you. But if 25% of your class is withdrawing, or 40% of them is withdrawing or failing, or 50 or 60% of them is getting a D, failing, or withdrawing, I'm going to be very concerned about that, because for whatever reason, and then it makes the numerical evaluations even more suspect, because chances are all those people who withdrew weren't there to contribute to the numerical evaluation, so it's a very compromised sample. Now I know that other departments are going to look at that very differently, but that's something that I think is kind of a useful objective tool to self-evaluate as well. So that's something that I would think about in terms of your teaching portfolio.
I'll say one thing talk about what to include. The things you can attribute to yourself. And a 4.5-inch binder isn't any more impressive than a 2-inch binder if you have the right materials in it. Because like I had someone this year who turned in some materials, and there was a big packet of music that person didn't write. And all they did was compile it from other places. And while that's interesting, it's not really their work. It's what they're using to teach, but it's not their work. I want to see the things that you created, the things that are attributable to you. The page from the conference bulletin that has your name. The things that I can look at and say, okay, this is evidence of something they've done. So there can be too much information, and you just want to cut through the clatter for the people who are going to evaluate it, and the things that can be attributable directly to you, I think is important to have in there. And while there are some, it's not bad to have some other evidence, you don't want to overdo it. If I'm looking at that 4.5-inch binder, I'm looking for someone who's pipetting it. And then I suddenly become, oh, this is kind of big. Then, is this really all necessary in this binder? So be concise with what you're doing. You don't want to overdo it. You want to have everything that's important, just don't overwrite.
And I just want to add one thing to that. This goes back to research and publications. If you're on a 6-author publication, or you're publishing with a student, or something like that, the useful part of it, which is to follow up on what he was talking about, is explain what your role in that was. If you were basically a mentor, that's a completely different role than if you did all the statistical analysis, or if you were the primary author, or you were just a secondary. So that's one of the ways that you can sort of make your case, is by talking specifically about what your role was. And that includes service as well. Lots of people get nominated to lots of committees and kind of show up and don't really do anything. But if you took the lead on one of those activities, that's worth noting.
Back to teaching and, maybe supporting the fact that you are a good teacher. Something I wish I had started doing much sooner was saving examples of student work. Because, you may have a really outstanding student who writes a terrific research paper or produces an amazing performance or a piece of art, and before you know it, the student is gone and you don't have a picture or a copy of that paper or that poster presentation or whatever. So you might consider, before your students leave your class for the semester, documenting the really outstanding things they've done, and then when it's time to put together your portfolio, you have some things to choose from, instead of just going, oh my goodness, what happened, what do I have right now from this semester that maybe I can use? So before your students disappear, save some copies of their best work to show what you've helped them to accomplish.
Two quick things. One is, keep in mind we can turn in an electronic portfolio. You do not have to turn in a binder of 4.5 inches or 4 inches. You may turn in the equivalent of that as a thumb drive, sort of save the environment. I would encourage you to do that if you can, because the university is sometimes slightly behind in terms of electronic. I don't want to get too invested in that. So think about, you can turn in a thumb drive. It's would be a good thing to do. Other thing, as Diane was saying, try to keep student assignments and create a structure where you have the syllabus from that class, the assignment you gave out, and then a student paper that can be linked all together. And that will help you sort of make a case for your teaching, right? Here's the assignment, here's what it was about, it's based on the syllabus in this area, and here's the student response. And you don't need to include every single thing that a student turned in. Include samples. And then in the letter section, when you're writing your teaching description, have kind of a macro description of my interest in teaching is blank. And here you can see it represented by my syllabus, by the assignment I gave, and the student response. And that will help. So think of 3 possible ways of approaching your teaching statement, which is kind of how you describe your teaching, how you've reflected on your teaching, and then maybe how this relates to you as a student, when you were a student, and how you changed as a teacher. You had a class where you learned this as a student, and you really want to model that type of teaching. That's really helpful for a committee that's not in your field to know how you are as a teacher.
Quick comment.
First of all, I'll turn the microphone on. The College of Science and Engineering Faculty Handbook has a fairly detailed list of things that should be in the P&T portfolio. I would suspect that the other colleges have, the handbooks have that as well. Make sure you get that list and make sure that everything that they ask for is in your P&T portfolio. We had some issues with that this past summer. I had 5 go up this time, so I had a busy summer. But just get that list and make sure that everything's on it that you put in there and don't leave anything out.
I'm going to ask one final question, so we have a little bit of time for questions from all of you. And Dr. Sipes, I'm going to ask you this question first, because I know that you have a class that you need to get to. to. So what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a new faculty member to help make the portfolio process relatively smoother and maybe less stressful?
Well, I think we went over a lot of that already. I do have a magic file where I throw everything in, so I have a record. And that includes things like emails asking me to do stuff. Like to be on a search committee, for example. I may not have a program or a published article, but if I have that email, that will remind me, oh, I was on that search committee. And then the other thing, there's a magical button in digital measures, and it's called the duplicate button. Many of the things that we do, we repeat from year to year, whether it's maybe attending the same professional conference or maybe you're going to publish a similar article. And so if you go into that screen and check the box next to something you've done, there's a duplicate tab at the top, and it will open a duplicate of that, and then you can just update the date or update the title or whatever, and it makes things go much, much, much faster, so you're not having to retype everything for every single thing that you do. So I would recommend checking that out.
I don't really have much to add. I think that we've sort of mentioned a lot of things. I think for me, before I went up for my tenure and promotion, I met with my chair first and had them review the binder with me, and or at least my CV, not my whole binder. But I had them review my CV, and then I met with the dean before that as well. It depends on different colleges, but it helped sort of lessen the stress when they at least said, well, it's okay, right, or whatever. And they can't say it's good. I mean, they can't say you're great, but at least they looked at it and they weren't like, oh, you're in trouble. So it was helpful to me and they provided me examples for what I can emphasize a little bit more, what I can talk about. So it helped me to meet with the chair, meet with the dean, so at least I had a sense that, I was, I don't know how to describe it, comfortable, but still stressed. That's all I got.
Yeah, and we already mentioned keep up. Don't do it all at once. We have our one faculty member who's January 30th. I'm sure he'll be walking around the halls saying, I guess it's time I do my faculty annual report. He does it every year. And it's more than just a little bit bothersome. It's like, don't do it all at once. Because be thoughtful about it. And you're not going to, it's hard to remember things sometimes. I'm at the age now where, a kid will tell me something in the hallway and I forget it by the time I get to my office. So if you're relying on your memory to be able to enter things at the end of the year, do it as you go. That'll reduce the stress a lot. And if you're not sure about how something's supposed to be categorized, ask somebody, because that's an issue we've had in our department at times. Where someone's like, is this service or is it teaching? What is this? Where do I categorize this? Ask. And ask, I would say ask the chair, because there's times where we don't even always agree on that in music. What's scholarly and creative and what's teaching? And I might be like, no, it's not. That's teaching, not scholarly and creative. And they may disagree, but at the end, I'm the one assessing it. So I would ask the chair, and just make sure that you know how to categorize things and where to put them so they benefit you the most.
Also, I think in the College of Liberal Arts, we're the only people who, does everyone do the third year review? Faculty? Maybe we're the only ones who do the interview, I'm not sure. Yeah, we're the only ones who do. You have a third year review process, and some of the language around that process is currently at the Faculty Senate for determination. If your third year review points out a deficiency, and let's be honest, we all have deficiencies, nobody's perfect, and you have not attempted to remedy that or explained it by the time you submit your tenure and promotion file, that's going to be problematic. Because that's the point of the third year review. It's like, gee whiz, you're getting close to tenure and promotion. These are areas in which we would like to see improvement. I know that my third year review helped me immensely in identifying some of the areas where my portfolio was much weaker. So I think that that's really important. And we all know we shouldn't do it at the last minute, but the relationship to the department chair, to your portfolio, whether it's digital measures or tenure and promotion, is a lot like the professor-student relationship. When you're a student, you remember the professor as one person. The professor sees a sea of faces out in front of them. And so when we're going through annual reviews, if we're doing 20 or 30 people, materials that are poorly done or incomplete or problematic in any way are going to stand out because you're not just being evaluated against your own record. You're sort of, there is some sense of collective evaluation in terms of whatever standard is held for your discipline or your department, and I think it's kind of important to remember that.
Hopefully in those meetings, those annual review meetings with your chair, you are, particularly the assistant professor level, you're getting some feedback on progress toward promotion and tenure. That's part of the goal of that. And in our department, our college, we've really made an effort to tie the annual evaluations to promotion and tenure standards. So if you get a satisfactory or better in your annual evaluation in a certain area, then that should indicate that you're on the right track for promotion and tenure. What we don't want to have is people getting good evaluations every year and then getting denied promotion and tenure because they had some shortcomings. So that's hopefully you're getting that kind of advice in your annual evaluations when you meet with your chairs.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists very much for joining us today. I know you are all incredibly busy, and we really appreciate you for sharing your time and your insights with us today. Thank you very much. So we are going to open it up to see if anyone has any questions. Nancy will bring the microphone over.
Hi, I'm Natalie from College of Nursing and Health Science, and most of all, thank you very much. I started last year, but I didn't have a discussion like this, so I had a really hard time to fill out this digital measure last year, so that's why I'm here. I want to ask you though, because of the situation, our college hire a lot of mid-career faculty, which means I'm here second year, but I'm pre-tenure evaluation next year, which means I had a previous year, 2 university, one in Texas, 4-year, and then, but I had a wonderful opportunity for global nursing science in Korea, so I spent 2 years to develop new program, blah, blah, blah. So, but I'm not hearing that, I should have, saved a copy of the wonderful, student work, because I remember really there are a lot of nice student work, and I've done a lot of things, but I feel like I did not save enough for pre or tenure evaluation of this university I'm gonna get. So do you have any special advice for this mid-career faculty who moved to the Texas A&M for the potential of this university, and what kind of documents you might ask for those mid-career faculty from previous universities?
Well, I think you could always ask someone at your previous university to write you a supportive letter. I think it's kind of like any time we switch jobs in academia, like if you become a provost, you have to show that you meet the criteria for a full professor, even though you may have been at 4 different universities. So I think, again, it goes back, you don't necessarily have to have physical documentation as long as you can document what you've done and why you've done it and how it's led you to the place you're at and how you've taken that and moved on with it here.
I was just going to say, the idea of having examples of student work, I don't think it's a requirement of anybody's program. It's just a suggestion. But I think the supportive letter is a great idea. And it may depend on the program, whether you can, how much about your teaching from another institution would even be, considered here. If it's students from somewhere else, that may not be something that they would want you to include anyway. Maybe check with your chair.
Yeah, this is a question that a lot of faculty face. They often don't collect this material. I think that's our running theme we've had here, is that we often get busy, we forget these things. So you're not alone. I was, a lot of faculty, they'll have one note, and that's sufficient. A student from a class from 5 years ago said, wow, your class was fantastic. That's sufficient. You don't have to have 20 emails. 1 or 2, in terms of comparing to other faculty, that's not unusual. You might have 4 or 5 total thank you notes or emails or some kind of contact, and the student might be talking about something completely different, but say at the bottom, wow, I really enjoyed your class. Do that.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, but I guess I'll just start with one for now. With the digital measures, and you mentioned that when you list the co-PI, it appears on each person's digital measures. As you're making updates to that particular grant, let's say, is that going to affect the other individuals on campus? Is that going to affect what shows on their digital measures at the same time?
If you entered their name on digital measures and you update it or don't update it, it will still show on theirs. Like, I was part of a team that applied for a grant many years ago, and the PI has since retired, and it still keeps on showing up on my digital measures because she never put the end date on it. Although, in the past, Brian Baker allowed people to modify that, but when you have multiple authors or PIs or whatever, I would sit down and discuss this with them up front before anyone enters it into digital measures. And this is why doing it maybe more than one day in advance before it's due is good, because when you print it, you will see that. And, you know, as chair, me hearing, well, you know, I didn't really have time to review it, even though everybody knows every year that they have to do it, you know, feels a little thin to me, frankly. But yes, everything you update there with the other people's names on it will be updated on theirs as well.
Okay, so let's say there's multiple people and I prefer my entry description. If I delete the other ones, well,
You can't delete the other ones.
You can't delete
You
them.
cannot. That's the issue, is once it's entered, it cannot be deleted, and whereas Brian Baker will delete your entry, he will not delete someone else's entry. So that's why I'm saying negotiate that with people up front, because I've gotten far as in the last couple of years where all 4 authors all entered it exactly the same. And, you know, what would you do if a student turned something in with 4 of the same entries on it? You'd be like, right? I mean, come on, let's be honest here.
Hi, thank you very much. I really value the advice of being sort of transparent or talking with your chair and your dean, but what happens if the department chair or the dean is a new dean or a new department chair than the one that adjudicated your sort of third-year review between like third-year review and P&T? Thoughts, advice for how to sort of navigate maybe that change in sort of chair or deaniness during your journey through?
Some people are going to that meeting my second year, and I value what the previous chair has done, because that's what I would seek out, to see what the pattern was prior to when I got there. Because you're not starting new just because I'm sitting in the office for the first time. So I would actually seek out information myself from the chair, as chair, but I don't think there's anything wrong with talking to the chair. It's, hey, you know, how am I doing, you know, how is my progress? Because like, that's one of the actually issues I had with P&T last year, was not having a lot of evidence prior, that was left with me prior, and this person was going for tenure, and it made it a challenge. So I actually, when you say the change, I'm actually seeking to keep things as consistent as I can, as objective as I can across one chair to the next. Not everyone might be that way, but I do think that is on an individual basis, on a person-to-person basis when it comes to chairs.
Remember, after all, the chair, whether they did it the year before or not, they're gonna be the ones who write that letter for you. So you might as well meet with the new chair.
I also think that if you are uncomfortable for some reason, talking to either, you know, sometimes new faculty, they don't really want to talk to the chair or the dean. I would say most chairs in other departments would be more than happy to sit down and have that conversation with you. If you said, you know, I just want a different perspective, you know, because sometimes going outside the discipline can be very, very helpful. And they may not be able to go to some of the pedagogical issues that are unique to your discipline or advice about the process. And I think most of them would be more than willing to do that.
Do it sooner than later.
Just very quick, I think the situation that everyone's going to face, because for many chairs, it's a 3-year term. I know things have changed slightly, and sometimes chairs are for life and things like that. So, I was going to say something, but I should. So many of you will probably have a chair move in or a dean move in and out. So it's really just maintain the transparency, right? That you communicate with the new chair. The new chair will see all the previous evaluations. They will know how you've been evaluated in the past. So it would be shocking to suddenly have a completely different evaluation the next year for no apparent reason. So I think just maintain the communication. It's really, don't model yourself on what I did, which was never communicate. There's a benefit to talking with the chair. The chair's never too busy to talk with the faculty. That's my approach.
We have time, well, we're actually out of time, but I think we'll take one more question.
Thank you. So it was already mentioned that CLA has certain wordings that are now under review about whether you're performing excellent or well or...
That's for CLA, but it's part of a whole university initiative. And the wording for third-year review and tenure is a university.
Okay, so I have a question about that because I heard that certain chairs are scaling new faculty lower so that they can show progress. But that also, if you're really performing really well in your first year, it sets the bar for your future years very, very high. So what is your response, and do you have any advice if you're dealing with such a situation?
Well, first of all, I've never heard that. And, we do talk amongst ourselves.
Okay.
But the problem with your first evaluation is it will be based on 1 semester of work, which is a very limited sample. So it's always a bit of a dilemma for the chair because you want people, you want to cheerlead and want people to feel good about themselves, but it's hard to give somebody an excellence in service when they have done no service, right? So I think part of that goes to how the chair explains that in the letter that's available. But that first year evaluation is really only on 4 months, and that one's a tough one. But I don't think there is any kind of concerted effort amongst the chairs to scale down how new faculty are evaluated. So at least I'm not aware of that.
No, I mean, that hasn't been discussed, at least in our college. Now, where that might be coming from is that there was a fairly recent change from having a 5-point scale where exemplary was the highest and then it went down from there to now we have 4 points on the scale. So excellent is the highest, so perhaps that's where that language came from, but there's no deliberate attempt to score people low, so they have to do better or something that I'm aware of. So we can put that conspiracy theory to rest.
My experience as chair is usually we want you to succeed. We want you to get tenure. So the idea that we're going to purposely score you down doesn't make sense to me in terms of the larger end game, right? I want to give you the tools necessary to succeed, not to scare you. I don't think scaring you works. We try to force you to do better. That's not, at least not how I would work as chair.
Thank you all again for coming today, and thank you again to our panelists for sharing.